Nestled in the quiet hills of Brandwood, Los Angeles, the former estate of Hollywood heartthrob Robert Taylor has long been a topic of whispered conversation among locals. Though the actor's time there was marked by a string of successful films and high-profile social gatherings, it is the house's eerie afterlife that continues to captivate imaginations. In 1985, shortly after the property was sold to a young couple, strange occurrences began. They described an unsettling sensation of being watched, especially in the grand living room, where Taylor was known to entertain. Late at night, faint rustling sounds could be heard in the hallways, as if someone were brushing past the walls. At first, the couple attributed the noises to the old house settling. But then came the footprints. One crisp autumn morning, the owners awoke to find damp footprints on the polished wooden floor of the entryway. They led from the front door to the grand staircase, then abruptly disappeared halfway up. Thinking it was a prank, they installed a state-of-the-art security system. Yet, the cameras captured nothing, no intruders, no movements, though the footprints continued to appear sporadically, always in the same pattern. Neighbors began sharing their own stories. A gardener working on the property claimed he heard footsteps behind him, only to turn and find no one there. A former housekeeper, hired to clean out the place before it was sold, refused to re-enter after hearing what she described as soft whispers emanating from the upstairs bedroom, where Taylor often retreated for solitude. Paranormal investigators were eventually invited to the estate. They reported significant electromagnetic disturbances, particularly near the library, one of Taylor's favorite rooms. One investigator claimed to have seen faint impressions on the thick Persian carpet, as though someone were pacing back and forth. A psychic medium who visited the house described the presence as unresolved energy, tied to a deep melancholy. In 2010, the house changed hands again, but the new owners also found themselves unnerved by its lingering atmosphere. Friends visiting the property often remarked on sudden cold drafts, despite the temperate climate. Once, during a dinner party, an entire group heard the sound of footsteps descending the staircase, though no one else was in the house. The most chilling account came from a family friend who spent the night in one of the guest rooms. She awoke to the sound of someone shuffling papers in the adjacent room. When she mustered the courage to investigate, she found the study empty, except for a faint outline of footprints on the dusty floor. While skeptics dismiss the tales as overactive imaginations fueled by Hollywood glamour, others aren't so sure. Could it be that Robert Taylor, a man often described as private and contemplative, never truly left the house that he so adored? To this day, the Brandwood estate remains occupied, its owners rarely discussing the rumors. Yet those who visit often leave with an uneasy feeling, as though they've just missed someone walking by, a faint echo of the golden age of Hollywood, still alive in the quiet rustling and unseen footsteps of Robert Taylor's haunting legacy. As the years passed, the strange phenomena in Robert Taylor's house only grew more perplexing. By the spring of 2015, the current owners had resigned themselves to the oddities, treating them as quirks of living in a historic home. That was until the night of the storm. It was an unusually heavy downpour for Los Angeles. Thunder rattled the windows, and rain cascaded down the large bay panes in sheets. The owners had invited a small group of friends over for dinner, hoping to distract themselves from the oppressive weather. They lit a fire in the grand living room and shared stories over wine, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. Around midnight, the power went out. Candles were quickly lit, and the group moved to the library, its rich wood paneling and cozy chairs offering a sense of comfort in the storm. One of the guests, an amateur historian, began leafing through a collection of old books that had come with the house. "Did you know Taylor kept a journal?" she asked casually, holding up a leather-bound volume. The owners exchanged puzzled glances. "We didn't even know that was there." The guest opened the journal, its pages yellowed with age, and began reading aloud. The entries were mundane at first, detailing film schedules, personal musings, and lists of guests at lavish parties. But as the storm raged on, the tone shifted. Taylor had written about unsettling dreams, visions of shadowy figures standing at the foot of his bed and whispers that seemed to echo through the house. The group grew quiet, their initial amusement replaced by unease. Just as the guest reached a passage describing footsteps that appear without a source, a loud crash echoed from the hallway outside the library. Everyone froze. Could it be the wind? Someone whispered. No, the owner said, shaking their head. That sounded like something falling. They crept to the hallway, their candlelight casting flickering shadows on the walls. A heavy vase that had sat undisturbed on a pedestal for decades lay shattered on the floor. Rain streaked the windows, but the house was sealed tight. No one could have entered, and no draft could have caused such destruction. As they stood there, debating whether to call the police, a new sound emerged: soft, deliberate footsteps on the second floor. The kind of sound that could only be made by someone wearing leather-soled shoes. One of the guests, emboldened by a mix of curiosity and wine, called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The footsteps stopped abruptly. Silence hung in the air, so thick it was almost tangible. And then came the voice. Low and distant, it carried an unmistakable tone of sorrow. "Why are you here?" it asked, the words stretching and echoing unnaturally, as if spoken from a great distance yet still impossibly close. The group stood frozen, staring at each other in the dim candlelight. The question, "Why are you here?" hung in the air like a physical weight. It was impossible to pinpoint its source. It seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The owner's hand trembled as they gripped the flashlight they had fetched earlier, its weak beam casting eerie shadows up the staircase. The footsteps resumed, this time descending the stairs, each step deliberate and heavy. But as the light was shown on the staircase, there was nothing, no figure, no shadow, no disturbance. The sound, however, continued as clear as if someone were right there. One guest, pale and visibly shaken, whispered, "This isn't just the house settling." The amateur historian clutched the journal tightly, her knuckles white. "It's him," she said, almost inaudibly. "He wrote about this. About feeling trapped." "Trapped?" the owner asked, their voice rising with a mix of fear and disbelief. The historian nodded, flipping frantically through the pages. She stopped abruptly at an entry marked just weeks before Taylor's death. "Listen to this," she said, her voice trembling. "He wrote, 'The house doesn't feel mine anymore. It's as if it watches me now.' The whispers grow louder. I can't leave, but I don't know why." Before anyone could respond, the candles flickered violently, though there was no breeze. The dim light seemed to stretch and warp the room, shadows twisting into shapes that defied logic. One by one, the flames extinguished, plunging the group into darkness. And then, just as panic began to take hold, the smell hit them. It was faint at first, a lingering scent of cigar smoke, rich and unmistakable. Taylor had been a well-known cigar aficionado, but no one in the group smoked. The smell grew stronger, more oppressive, filling the room as if someone were standing among them, exhaling slowly. "Open a window," one guest choked out, coughing against the acrid air. But as the owner stumbled to the nearest latch, they found it stuck fast, sealed as if the storm outside were pressing against the house itself. The historian's voice broke through the rising chaos. "Wait, there's something else in the journal." She squinted at the faded ink, reading aloud. "The footprints, they only appear when the storm comes. They lead somewhere, but I'm too afraid to follow." The group exchanged panicked glances, the words sinking in just as another crash sounded, this time from the far end of the hallway. The sound was followed by a soft dragging noise, like fabric being pulled across the floor. The owner hesitated, their flashlight beam shaking as they aimed it down the hall. The light landed on the unmistakable imprint of a footprint, damp and freshly formed, heading toward the back of the house. But this time there was a difference. Beside the footprints, running parallel, was a long, dark smear on the floor. Something or someone had been dragged along with them. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The dragging sound grew louder, as if whatever was moving down the hallway had become aware of their presence and was deliberately drawing closer. The historian clutched the journal to her chest, her eyes darting toward the faint footprints now illuminated by the trembling beam of the flashlight. "What do we do?" one of the guests whispered frantically. "Follow them," the historian said, her voice barely audible but firm. He didn't. We have to know where they lead. No way, another guest hissed. This isn't curiosity, this is survival. We should leave. Leave, the owner shot back. The storm's flooding the streets, and you think we'll be safer out there? The dragging stopped abruptly, plunging the group into an unnatural silence. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a new sound emerged, a low, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't a knock but something softer, more deliberate. Tap, 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 like the sound of fingers drumming on wood. Is it signaling us? The owner whispered, their voice trembling. The historian moved toward the footprints, stepping cautiously. The storm. The journal said the footprints only appear during storms, she muttered. This is our only chance to understand what's happening here. Reluctantly, the group followed, their steps slow and careful. The footprints led to a door at the end of the hall, the door to the basement. The smear alongside the prints stopped abruptly at the threshold, as though whatever had been dragged had vanished. No, the owner said, shaking their head. We've lived here for years. That basement's just storage. It's never. The words died in their throat as the door creaked open on its own. Beyond it, the basement stairs descended into a darkness so complete it seemed alive. The flashlight flickered violently as the owner aimed it into the void. For a moment, they thought they saw something, a glint, like the reflection of eyes, but it disappeared before they could focus. I'm not going down there, one guest said firmly, stepping back. But as if in answer, the tapping started again, louder, sharper, this time echoing up from the depths. Then came the voice, clearer now, as if it were standing right behind them. Find it. Find what? The historian called out, her voice trembling but determined. What are you trying to show us? Silence. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, the storm outside surged. Thunder rattled the walls, and a gust of wind howled through the house, though all the windows remained shut. The flashlight beam caught something on the first step of the basement staircase. A faint shimmer, almost imperceptible, like the edge of a thread trailing downward. The historian took a cautious step forward, the journal still clutched tightly in her hand. She reached out to touch the thread, only to recoil as it dissolved into mist, curling like smoke around her fingers before dissipating. From below, the voice came again, softer now, almost pleading. Don't let it fade. The group exchanged terrified glances. They couldn't move forward, but they couldn't retreat either. The house seemed to hold them in place, as though it were waiting for them to act. And then, from the basement, came the sound of a single, deliberate footstep. The sound of the footstep was heavier this time, deliberate and slow, as though whoever or whatever was below wanted them to know it was there. The group recoiled instinctively, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. For a moment, the faint shimmer on the stairs reappeared, now weaving downward like a trail of gossamer thread leading into the darkness. The historian inhaled sharply. It's not just a thread, she whispered. It's pulling us somewhere. The owner swallowed hard. Pulling us where? She pointed to the shimmer. Look at the way it moves, like it's alive, like it's trying to guide us. One of the guests shook their head vehemently. No, no way. This isn't guidance. This is a trap. Before anyone could respond, the basement door slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash. The flashlight flickered and went out entirely, plunging the group into complete darkness. A second later, a faint glow began to emanate from the staircase itself, a pale, silvery light, pulsing softly like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The tapping returned, sharper now, echoing up the stairs in perfect time with the light's pulses. And then, just beneath the sound, they heard something else. A faint, rhythmic scratching, like nails scraping against wood. Do you hear that? The historian whispered, her voice shaking. It's coming from the walls. As if to confirm her words, the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, the scratching growing louder, more insistent. Someone gasped as a section of plaster cracked open, revealing what looked like a hollow cavity behind the paneling. The historian shone her phone's flashlight into the gap and froze. Inside the wall, barely visible in the weak light, was the outline of a handprint, pressed deeply into the wood. The impression was old, its edges worn smooth, but it was unmistakable long fingers, wide palm, far too large to belong to any of them. A faint scent of cigar smoke wafted out from the cavity, as if carried on an invisible breath. "It's his," the historian murmured. "It has to be." The owner stepped back, their voice barely above a whisper. "What is this? Why is this happening now?" The historian didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the handprint, her face pale. "He didn't leave," she said finally. "He's been here all along. But he's not alone." The group barely had time to process her words before the dragging sound resumed, this time coming from directly below their feet. It moved slowly, methodically, as though something were circling beneath the floorboards, searching. "Find it," the voice whispered again, now trembling with urgency. The silvery light on the staircase brightened suddenly, illuminating what lay at the bottom. A door. Its surface was warped and splintered, as though it had been forced shut long ago, but carved into the wood was a symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, surrounded by faded markings. "What is that?" one of the guests asked, their voice rising in panic. The historian didn't answer. She had dropped the journal, her shaking hands covering her mouth. The symbol on the door matched one of the sketches in Taylor's writings, an entry she hadn't read aloud. One that described a secret he had been desperate to bury. The dragging sound stopped. The tapping ceased. For a moment, the silence was deafening. And then, with a low groan, the warped door at the bottom of the stairs began to open. The door creaked open, its warped edges catching on the stone floor, revealing a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow the faint silvery light emanating from the staircase. The group stood frozen, their breaths shallow, as the air grew colder, carrying with it an overwhelming sense of dread. "What now?" one of the guests whispered, clutching the historian's arm. No one answered. The historian, her face pale, hesitated before stepping forward, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. "We have to see," she said, her voice trembling. This is what he wanted us to find." The owner shook their head. "We don't even know what's in there." "That's the point," the historian replied. "Taylor knew something he couldn't escape. And neither can we now." With that, she descended the last few steps, the faint light flickering with each footfall. The others followed reluctantly, their movements slow and halting. As they reached the threshold, the silvery light brightened, revealing the interior of the room. It was a small circular chamber, the walls lined with dark wood panels etched with faint symbols. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it rested a box ornate, blackened with age, and sealed with a heavy iron clasp. The carvings on the box matched the symbol on the door, the jagged line bisecting the circle. "Is that?" the owner began, but their words faltered. The historian approached the pedestal, her eyes fixed on the box. "This is it," she murmured. "This is what he was afraid of, what he was trying to hide." The faint scent of cigar smoke grew stronger, curling through the air like an invisible specter. And then the voice returned, closer now, resonating from the very walls. "Open it." "No," one of the guests shouted, grabbing the historian's arm. "We don't know what's in there. We don't know what it will do." The historian hesitated, her hand hovering above the box. She turned to the others, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. "If we don't, this will never end. Whatever this is, it's tied to the house, to him. We have to understand it." Before anyone could stop her, she unlatched the clasp. The box opened with a low groan, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a thunderclap. Inside was a small, crumpled piece of paper, yellowed with age. The historian unfolded it with trembling hands. The paper contained a single line of handwriting, written in dark, slanted script. "What you take, you must return." As the words were read aloud, the room erupted in chaos. The walls began to tremble, the symbols glowing faintly before fading into ash. The dragging sound resumed, now impossibly loud, circling them as if something massive was moving just beyond the room's walls. The silvery light flickered violently, and for the first time the group saw him. Standing in the corner, Barely visible in the failing light was the figure of a man. His outline was faint, but his presence was undeniable: the strong jaw, the broad shoulders, the unmistakable silhouette of Robert Taylor. His eyes glinted with a sorrow so deep it felt tangible, and as he stepped forward, the dragging sound followed him, echoing with every step. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low and filled with despair. "Now you've opened it." "What do you mean?" the historian pleaded, her voice shaking. "What did we open?" Taylor's form began to waver, dissolving like smoke. But before he vanished entirely, his voice filled the chamber one last time. "You've invited it back." The room plunged into darkness. The dragging sound grew deafening, accompanied by a rising cacophony of whispers, thousands of voices speaking in a language none of them could understand. The group stumbled toward the staircase, desperate to escape, but the house itself seemed to resist them. The walls stretched, the stairs elongated, the doorway above receding into an impossible distance. And then, all at once, everything went silent. When the owner woke, they were lying in the foyer, surrounded by their guests, the house eerily still. The storm had passed, and sunlight streamed through the windows. The basement door was shut, the footprints gone, and the journal lay untouched on the library table. But the box was nowhere to be found. Years later, the owner sold the house, never speaking of what had happened that night. But rumors persisted of shadows moving through the hallways, of whispers in the dark, of something unseen that seemed to linger just beneath the floorboards. And on stormy nights, new residents reported finding footprints, leading to a door that refused to stay shut. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.